paper a few weeks ago. We can come down and share some information. Just to introduce, I'm Brett Smith. I manage the vertical capital delivery team, which is a mouthful, but basically we do buildings, and I'm also a project sponsor. Lynn Armitage here is the project manager. We have Joe Byrne over here, structural engineer from Lewis Bradford. Vanessa Carwell from Jasmine Architects. Elizabeth Winsor, just from our legal section. And Philippa Upton's our engagement advisor over here. So we're going to run through some of the purchasing meeting is just to update you on the findings of the pre-project investigation. So what we did is some technical reports just to see what the state of the play was. So we want to address structural damage to the South Library that occurred mainly in the 2010-2011 earthquakes, and looking at bringing this facility up to 100% of rebuilding standards. And we've classified them as an important service rebuilding. So just a reminder, the decision to repair the facility has been in the long-term plan for a long time, since 2016, and the decision was made then, and the project is included in the current long-term plan. So what we've got on the agenda today, we'll just show you what the Sustainability and Community Resilience Committee resolutions were. Also went through 1st of June. Some background, some reporting on the site, the earthquake damage, technical details, a little bit about costs and risks and opportunities, and then where we're going to go to after we've had a chat today. So the committee resolution. So we presented some technical reports to the committee, and with some additional things added to it by your local councillors to make sure that we include things like sustainability. I'll just go through the resolution. So we've been directed to progress the design for a rebuild of the South Library on its existing site, and we'll go over why that's important. Include the public throughout the design process, so we want to seek ideas and feedback prior to the endorsement of the concept before we take it to council. That's where we want people to contribute. Request that the rebuild is done to a high sustainability standards, including carbon emissions and water use, both during the construction and the operation of the library. Also request staff to hold a public briefing, which is live streamed, about the repair and build options discussed in the report, and to inform the affected community. So this is being live streamed and it is being recorded, so it'll be available if anyone misses it, they can go on. Make sure all the information is available to view in the South Library foyer. Endorse the development of a concept design and costing for consideration by council in the second quarter of 2023, so February, March, April, sometime. And to allow time for public inclusion in the design process. Just to note, the advancement of the project construction will require additional funding. So when we go back to council, what it means is we'll ask them whether to put additional money on budget, and whether that goes into the annual plan or whether we work to the long-term plan to do that. And when we go back to council, also requesting staff to assess and bring back options for a temporary library and service centre as close as possible to the site, because we don't want a gap between service delivery here and during the rebuild phase of the South Library, and to retain a sufficient level of library service. When we go back, we're also, what was spoken about at the meeting was also to go back and just reconfirm some of the figures that we put together for the repair option versus the rebuild option. So the report presented to council did provide a comparison of repair with rebuild, based and included a whole lot of technical advice, which we'll show you tonight. Council has asked us to consider several options along with the rebuild, and we put those into the report. So there was the repair of the existing building, rebuilding on the existing site, but adjacent to the current facility rather than on the same footprint. So, for example, building on the car park while this was still running or something like that. Renovation of the council-owned distribution centre, which is the building just through the fence there, which, when you have a look at it, you might think that's a crazy idea. We looked at the option anyway because we already own. Looking at a new site for this facility, so that could be anywhere really, if we could manage to get another site. Defer the repair or rebuild of the facility. We've already sweated the asset, as I say, for 10 or 11 years. So when we do go back, we will have some costings as to what it would cost to put it off again and sweat it a bit longer. Look at a public-private partnership. We presented some discussion on that. That would be where somebody came in and built something but also had some sort of private perhaps business running, for example, which is difficult for this site. We'll explain later. The site is actually designated for a library service. So, and considering a long-term lease instead of rebuilding the library. So you may be aware that Linwood, for example, have their library lease inside the wall. But downside of trying to do that here is the nearest closest mall or something like that is a long way from the Beacon area. So it's quite a different community. So anyway, we did address all those things. So a project team was put together and included the technical specialists, some of who are here tonight, and they've investigated the current cost and scope of repair and found that the scope and cost of the repair is significant due to the damage that we've found. Setting aside the earthquake damage, the building is also due for a major upgrade to modern standards. So even if it hadn't been damaged, 20-year life, some of the things are starting to fail and need replacing anyway. It could be built these days to a much greener building and more energy efficient. Some of the things that weren't necessarily, there's been innovations in the 20 years since it was originally built. And the space inside could be improved to much better suit customers and staff. You'll notice when you walk through the building, for example, there's a huge big hallway going from one end to the other that is just used for hallway. So there's potential to look at things like that. So the scope of the repair, if it was to be repaired, would have to address the structural damage that occurred to South Library, and it is more extensive than previously thought. And we have done some investigations to check that out. The extent of the fabric replacement, which is the building materials basically, required for repair is almost equivalent to a rebuild. And the complex repair has a high level of risk and unknowns in terms of time, cost and quality. Most of you have probably gone through rebuilds with your houses and repairs through QC and things like that. And once they start to open things up, they find more problems or don't fix them sometimes. So it's, that has made it quite complex. And trying to repair a building while holding down is quite a task. There's advantages to a rebuild, which include energy efficiency, comfort, reduced operational maintenance costs, lower whole of life carbon assessment, which we'll show you later on, lower capital costs, more surety of the construction program because you're not uncovering things as you go, and better contractual terms and warranties and guarantees. And the cost estimate for repair well exceeds the 13.6 million of CapEx funds on the front. So the project will require a future bid for construction, as I said earlier, when we go back to council. So the building was opened in 2003. Some of you, actually, how many of you remember the building that was here before that? So right, first when I started at council, I used to come to meetings here. The location of the building on the site is dictated by the roading network, the river, the landscape elements, and there's also pipes and wells in that area as well. And it has been scheduled with after the earthquakes, they rewrote the district plan, and this got rescheduled for service centres and community centres. So that's what I was saying before, the private partnership thing wouldn't work if you wanted to establish a different business on it. The earthquake damage. So the majority of it was in that earthquake sequence, 2010, 2011. The rapid inspections found the building strength was compromised. Temporary strengthening was undertaken in 2013. Now that has only brought it up to 34% for an IL3 building. If it dropped below 33%, we'd close it. But in the IL3, that's just a classification of building as to, it's all to do with life risk. In 2016, council selected a part repair option, noting that more investigative work was needed and the potential for insurance issues. So we've now done that investigative work. And then 2018, it was deferred because Tauranga was being, and then 2020 it was deferred again, partly to help budgets fit. That's what capital smoothing is, but also to follow along from the completion of the Hornby Library, which has already started. We have the library being built. Still me? Still me?
I can swap it.
That's right. So the existing building, you'll know it, you love this place. It's a great community hub. It's a single-story building with structural steel frames, heavy precast wall elements in some areas. And the existing foundations are reinforced concrete slab on grade. That's good. Ground conditions, the topsoil, landfill material over sand and gravel with liquefiable layers. And you would have seen that liquefaction at the time of the earthquakes as well. So the earthquake damage is precast wall connections, slab cracking, and differential settlement. So the differential settlement was around the whole thing, aside from the slab in the land going down, almost 300 in places, the whole building's on a 90 mil. And there was cracking to the ceilings and wall linings, which would have been patched at the time. The precast walls have been addressed with the red steel props, which have done a good job, and because they're bracing structural steel frames, and the current earthquake rating, which I say is 34%. You go.
Oh, over to you. He's on a roll.
The slab. So a new concrete raft slab, whether it's a repair or a rebuild, we put a new concrete slab raft over the existing slab. A few reasons for doing that: it minimises excavation and disturbance of the contaminated ground, but also saves on a heck of a lot of dumping. It inherently re-levels the floor and increases flood resilience. And we've had geotech work done, so it's endorsed by the geotechnical overground improvement, and the same solution as I say if it's a new build or a repair. It would be quite difficult to add to the slab if it's a repair because you need a slab through. Steel framing, retain the existing roof, but add new steel columns. So the steel columns need beefing up with the building code. The requirements changed a couple of times since the earthquake and since it was originally designed. So it's difficult to carry out other works under the existing roof, and it limits the layout flexibility. You can imagine what the library and some of the rooms would be like with extra support. It would need new steel bracing struts to the roofs and walls. We have to take off the precast, the hazardous, because they're hazardous due to their seismic weight. And but if we did do that, it would result in less strengthening works. And the final EQ rating, we would be able to get it up to 100% of NBS and insurable, but for life safety only. It's the limited damage reduction in the smaller earthquake. So yeah, if we get it up to 100% of NBS, the likelihood of damage is less. but it would still be partly an old building, which affects insurability. But the tone's just about sticking to the roof of the mouth, so.
So just a bit of a summary of the architectural findings. It's
You stand up.
oh, sorry, it's one of the slides. 20 years since the building was constructed, in round numbers now. Many of the envelope and building envelope and services elements are getting near the end of their design life now. There's been significant changes in the building regs since construction, and a lot of fabric no longer meets modern requirements. In terms of fabric replacement, the amount of fabric that we need to replace to do the repair is almost equivalent to the full replacement. The extensive repair required to systems has a high level of risk and unknowns in terms of time, cost and quality, and that's something that people may have seen themselves when you started on that journey of repairing something post-break. You take off one wall element and behind it you find another piece of damage. So it's just that journey into the unknown for repair. There are some issues with the building services now coming towards the end of their efficient working life, and particularly we've got some issues in the sewer system with the heating and ventilation systems, and that can all be fixed up in the scope of a repair. There's more limitations though to fixing those things with a repair than just because you've got constraints with the existing framework around you. An example of that would be keeping the existing roof structure. There's a limit to how much weight we can hang off that structure, so that limits our options in terms of ducting and service components for the heating and ventilation. There's the opportunity for an improved layout. By putting down a new slab, we've got an opportunity to think about the internal layout of the building, roughly within the existing building footprint. So that's an opportunity to improve the way the building functions. In terms of the community use and operation, a repair will limit the opportunity for a new layout. For a new layout to meet the new needs with reduced operational and maintenance costs. So a repair, there's a limit exactly to what you can do in terms of, for example, putting heating and cooling back in the slab element, because you've got a slab and you're inside the existing roof structure and you can't make the slab too deep, for example. It's just one of those things. So you've got to design around the fabric that you are keeping. There's benefits to a complete new system, energy efficient, have more comfort in the building, and better suit the needs of current and future customers and staff, because you aren't limited by those elements that you choose to keep in the repair. So the architects have done a carbon assessment for us, quite a detailed piece of work, and they've looked at the carbon assessment over the whole of the life of the building. So that talks about the fabric that goes into a building, the way that fabric operates during its life, and then the carbon that's returned at the end of the life of the building. And it's interesting in this case, because the repair is quite extensive, you can see that actually, in the end, a new build in this case is more efficient from a carbon context because the operating efficiency, so the bit where the life of the building operates, is more efficient than it is for a repair, because you can start from scratch with all those heating, ventilation, and cooling type systems, and really be efficient and have a thermally efficient building. So in the end, it's a better sustainability outcome to do a new build rather than a repair. And the big difference, as I say, in this case, is the operating efficiency of the building. So if you think about a building's life, for a new building, it's a 50-year life. So you've got 50 years of operating to consider. So now we're going to whiz through some slides now that are an illustration in a model form of what needs to be taken off and replaced during a repair. So this model was built by the architects when they did the carbon assessment for this project. And this is a slice down the middle of the building. So if you came in the front doors there and you walk straight ahead, to the right is this picture, and to the left we've removed that part of the building so you can see the slice. So we're on the west side and that's the east side. And the little blue things there, I don't know how well you can see those represent human figures, just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale of the building. So for the structural solution, we need to put a new slab in at ground level on top of the old slab. We need to put in larger structural columns, more bracing and struts, and that provides us a minimum heat height. So you lift it up to floor level, and so the humans, the blue humans, are coming closer to the lowest point of the ceiling height in the building. And east and west external walls, we're ending up with clashes with the proposed new structure, including the floor slab with the door thresholds. The windows start to become an issue. It means that you need to address those external walls. On the north, so that's the side, the riverside, we've got low level windows. You can see some along here. Those will be a clash with the new slab. It's a non-ventilated wall system, which is just the way we used to design buildings 20 years ago. We don't do that now. To avoid all the issues with warranties, guarantees, and interfacing with old fabric and new, it's actually just to replace that wall and make a bit of thermal envelope. South, that's the basalt clad wall on the outside there. It's we could keep that and we could integrate the new structure with it. If there's any remaining damage that we find, that's a risk, and the interface between the new fabric and that old fabric is an insurability risk for us. In the end, you would compromise with glazing and the thermal envelope by keeping that wall, but you could do it. The roof, internal gutters, the clerestory windows, that's more of the upper external of the roof. We've got issues with that. It's a non-ventilated roof system, cold bridges, so that's strips of the roof structure that don't have insulation, so they get colder than the rest of the roof. You get condensation. There's some moisture build up there. The metal roof itself on the outside, we had a roof condition report done 2016 on that, rusting, issues with flashing and water tightness. And in addition to those fabric issues, the thing isn't draining the way it was designed to because of the different settlement of the building. So it's a bit complicated. And in the end, that roof's at the end of its life, so it's better just to replace it. The roof comes off. So at the end of all of that repair work, there's not that much of the existing structure that's really able to be used. And you end up with, it's really only part of the skeleton that's left. So you can see we've got some of the roof structure, and we've got the south wall, and we've got the existing slab, with the theory being we would put a replacement slab on top. No need to dig up that old slab. The difference between that repair and a new build is that we don't retain that roof structure and we clear out the south wall. But again, we keep the existing slab. In terms of legal advice, and some of you may already have had this sort of legal advice in your own earthquake repairs. It is more difficult to scope a repair because of unforeseen damage. There is less contractual certainty with more potential for cost and time overruns. There are insurance with risk and liability in relation to the way the old fabric and the new fabric come together, and that connection is guaranteed. It can be very complicated. With a rebuild, it's easier in terms of you can fully define the scope, and that's a clean sheet, and you can make a much tighter contractual arrangement for that, not relying on the old fabric. The insurance advice is that if we don't repair the damage, we will have an issue with it in the future, and we do need to meet the requirements of the Building Act wherever it's possible. From an insurance perspective, a rebuild is easier because you can just fully insure it. And the Building Act, of course, is complied with as a matter of course. You've got to get building consent to build. In terms of cost, we have worked up a high-level cost estimate for the repair and rebuild on the same footprint. So we've assumed we're on the same part of the site with the same floor area. And the costs are actually quite similar because the extent of fabric replacement for the repair is just so extensive. And in actual fact, from the early figures, a rebuild looks like it could be cheap, slightly cheaper. They are really days for those numbers, but it gives you a feel for the cost of the repair, and that you can see why we might think about a rebuild with a start or something like that. So let's tell me what's wrong. 26.6 for a repair, which sounds enormous, and 24.8 is it? Or sorry, my AV system. 24.8 for a rebuild. Now they sound like really big numbers, and they are, but those at escalated figures. So there's about $3.4 million of escalation because we're not about to start building today. We wouldn't be building for some time, and at the rate that the costs of construction are increasing in materials, we know it will cost more tomorrow than it will today to build. But we've built that figure in there now for the long-term planning purposes, and for securing funds. The reason the repair costs more than the new build is simply because so much fabric is getting replaced, and by keeping a small amount of fabric in situ, you have to work around it, and it becomes inefficient working under a roof structure, temporarily propping it, all of those sorts of things. So actually, reusing that fabric isn't saving you money in this particular case. Program. So a repair or a rebuild, we think would take about 18 months, because obviously with the closure, we need to make sure we've got a continuous service for this community. So we're looking into some suitable premises to set up a temporary facility. Our first thoughts are that we would make sure that it was a customer services hub and a library together, so it's still a one-stop shop, just like here, and we want it to be close to the site, as close as we can practically be. So we are starting to look into that quite carefully. This facility would only close once a temporary facility was open. So there wouldn't be any period where there wasn't a service centre that was available. The timing for construction is phased for after Hornby, which is due to be complete later in 2023, but a start date hasn't been set. So we'll be going back to council, and there'll be an annual plan process. And once that process is concluded, and we've had all the feedback from everybody in the city, a decision will be made about the timing. We're about to close tomorrow. Business as usual. So in terms of the process, a little diagram. So we're in the little green box that says June 2022. That's us all the way over on the left side of the page. We're right at the beginning of the process. So we haven't started designing yet. We are gathering information to inform the design brief for the designers. That's where we are today, and we've got a survey that's just come up online, and this paper copies here at the facility. We're looking for feedback. What do you want to see here? What is it that you really need? And we'll be feeding that information into the design team when you're appointed, so that they can get off the right track for the design. So really important that you share that feedback with us nice and early. Because the earlier it comes in the process, the easier it is for us to consider it and improve those ideas. So your feedback will shape the design, the feel, and the functionality of this facility. In terms of next steps, we will be seeking the views and preferences of all of the interested and affected persons. So you don't have to be in this community to give feedback. We do want to hear from everybody, but particularly from this community. There will be several stages of activity, and as I say, We've got a survey that's up online now. And there's paper copies for those who just like filling in here. And if anybody needs a help filling it out, I'm sure we can find someone to help. That survey is open until 25th of July. It's just the first stage of feedback. So it won't be the only opportunity to speak, but the sooner we hear from you in the process, will be the design plan. So when we've completed that concept design and we've validated the cost, we'll be going back to council in early 2023 and seeking a decision on how they would like to advance the project. So that's a decision for a future council, noting that we've got council elections coming up shortly. The council will consider the concept design along with repair options. So they've asked us to give them a compare and contrast once we've completed this concept design. So that's what we'll be doing. A decision on any additional funding would be used in a future annual plan or long-term plan process. And currently, the budget we've got in the long-term plan sits over financial years 23 to 27. So that covers the design and construction period for the project. And we'd like to get started on that design. Yeah, so that's where we are. Questions? So really technical questions. And these really technical experts and more generic questions we can answer.
In the list of items the council wanted to address, I was surprised to see the distribution center in which was there being considered or proposed as a relocated site for them. So in fact, the new library was built over there, it wouldn't stay in being.
That's what they asked us to consider.
And will that be part of the information presented to the new council? What's the option?
We've already presented information about that to the council.
It hasn't been rejected.
No, council was asked to consider this other sites as well, because it may be easier to go into another site, goes fine, then take all that stuff out of there and get it fit for use, because it's really set up for shelving for the boxes and
Okay.
yeah. But it's
That's
certainly an option.
just the obvious one, from the point of view of the users, building a new library somewhere convenient, moving from here to there, in the space of a day or two, would be great.
Absolutely.
So quite a lot of detail around these options is in the council reports, which I have to agree they are very long and a little bit dry. But part of the importance that we take into consideration is that the holistic view of all of the technical inputs, one of which is that's a scheduled utility site under the district plan, and this is a scheduled community centre site. So under the district plan, it's quite a different consenting process.
But we are,
One of the things to think about.
we are hopeful we can get something very, very close.
Very, very
but we
close.
haven't improved.
Well, is it not possible to build the new library to the side of the distribution centre and have this continuing to function while a new one is built nearby?
I know exactly what you're saying, and many years ago, there was a plan done for that yard, that was before lectures used it. Again, it's a bit like this. This is positioned to avoid the pipes and the wells. There's quite a few pipes and well heads in that site as well. And so it is still a functioning part of the water services council. Surprisingly, there's actually not a lot of room when you map out pipes and bits and pieces, but we did look at that as part of this. We also looked at could we build it on the car park and then build here. But the beauty of building here is it's already designated for it, and if we build it on the car park, we would then have to just link to the resource consideration.
So the other thing to think about is that by building it here on top of the old slab, we can save time and money and carbon footprint.
But it's not going to get closed until we have something set up.
So
sort of a comment coming on from that and a question. At first I was surprised, that it was needs so much repair and is concerned about the carbon footprint. But I think that idea that you can reuse the slab without touching it, build on top of that, because there's a hell of a lot of concrete, CO2 embedded in this slab here, and being able to use that does seem like a real benefit. So one of the things that's, and I appreciate the presentation and all this information, so thank you very much for coming along. One of the things that surprised me in the whole process, though, in the presentation, is the idea that the outside here, and a lot of the internal services actually have are due for a major refit after 20 years. I must be getting old when I remember this is quite a recent building. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like a very long life, and I'm just wondering, it seems inevitable with this, but if this goes ahead, can you build the next one so it doesn't actually need everything replaced after 20 years?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Look, it surprised us too, but of course with the slab, the settlement of the slab, the heating pipes in it, there's problems that they put them in the slab itself, so we can't fix those. There's issues with the sewer line, and I don't know if you've been here in the library when the heating systems hasn't been working, but it was really cold the other day, I can tell you that. There's some librarians here might, but yeah, so things have been failing, which surprised us too. Back when they made that resolution years ago, they said we need to do some more investigations, and that's what we did. Why it didn't last longer, I don't know, but
I think it's a combination of earthquake damage, so a lot of the components have had a lot of physical push and pull, screws and loops and the such like moving flattings, etc. And the nature of the materials that were chosen at the time. And today we have a much firmer focus on sustainability and carbon than we did even 20 years ago. So I think we're on that evolution of sustainability. And so we've got an opportunity now to replace some of that fabric that is at the current something with a longer life.
and just bear in mind too that there's stuff inside this building that will be saved and reused. I mean, there's a lot of high-tech gear and bits and pieces like that. I mean, those high level prices are based on a number of buildings that have been built, not just in Christchurch, but across the country, libraries and museums and bits and pieces like that. So I think as we go through this, we'll find savings, fingers crossed. But it's just, but we'll also have the opportunity to address some issues like those low windows there that the kids used to sit there and throw books into the moat and things like that. As you can see, if you didn't take the structure down and you put another floor slab on top, you've got all of that just filled in. So yeah, even with a repair option, it's basically all going to come off.
More questions?
Can they guarantee the integrity of the existing slab?
We'll be using it as rather than relying on its structural strength. So we'll put a new slab on top that's like a ground. So it'll sit on the top, and what's underneath is essentially I'm going to call it fill, if that makes sense. We're not relying on its strength. We're literally building up.
A lot of houses around the rebuilt ended up with riprap constructions, so that they can be, if worst case scenario, something happens.
One of the things about the ground that this building is on is that it is part of an manufacturing site, and it's had lots of music parts, and the geotech modelling they put deep down underground. The failure mechanisms down the road, right down the road, not at the surface. So if there is an issue with future earthquakes and the ground does drop more, either it did in the most recent sequence, the raft gives you a resilient solution that stays at the top, keeps your structure intact and shapes the structure apart, and you can level it if you need to. So part of thinking about a raft is part of that resilience formula, as well as not wanting to dig up old ground.
We have got structural expert here and our architect, if you've got any questions you want to ask them.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm familiar with the rough concept of the house. It was going to be what was done to a replacement house. That is a vast raft. I'm amazed at the idea that it would retain its integrity, even with a major change of level in part of the site.
So the,
What you're going to tell me is yes, it will.
that's what we brought in.
So you're talking about the gravel raft under the concrete raft.
No, talking about the
The
new
concrete, the new concrete.
So basically, yeah, how it works.
It's set up.
So we've got all this deep sea liquefaction issue. So what we're trying to do is we put a gravel raft, structural raft on top of that. And by having quite a thick structural raft or concrete raft, it will smooth out the effects of that liquefaction. The other thing the site is going for is that it's already had a lot of liquefaction. So there's only so much toothpaste in the tube to squeeze out. So if there's another earthquake, you're only going to get a reduced amount of liquefaction. So what we do is we basically use the large, use the thick slab to sort of even out the deformations that occur from the liquefaction instead of it being sort of at a step point like it is now. So what's happened in this building is we've got the whole building, overall 90 mils. So the new slab would be designed to sort of bridge that and reduce the impact over the building. So if you get to a 25 mils over 6 metres, that sort of level, you say, well, that's sort of within the bounds of not having to repair. So if we can design a rapid slab that's strong enough to not do that, then we're okay. The other thing is that slab would be designed to say if you get, say, settlement in a corner and nowhere else, that slab would cantilever out and the corner wouldn't settle. If we lost support over the internal, say 4 or 5 metres in a room like this, it would bridge that. So it basically bridges the gaps and smooths out the effect of the liquefaction. While the whole thing will ride down with liquefaction, you won't end up on the corner sinking or a big hole in the slab like here.
More questions?
Yes,
What are some of the exciting combined uses that you've seen around the world? Is there something that these one-stop shops, you drive all over the city to go to this one purpose place? Have you seen things that are really exciting combined use?
Yeah, we were just looking at something like here this morning. There's all sorts of really exciting examples and benchmarks overseas, and in fact even in New Zealand as well. There's some really exciting opportunities, and I think that is something that even in the short space of time and the feedback that we've heard so far is this is a chance to take that opportunity to provide a more integrated community hub. So something where people can walk in and easily see what's on offer, and it could be all sorts of things. It could be, it could be a maker space, a creative spaces with the sorts of equipment that you wouldn't normally otherwise have access to. It will of course include books. There might be other digital forms of media that are available, council service desk like we have at the moment. But the opportunity is to think of what things might be like in 15 or 20 or 30 years time and design for that. So to gentleman's point earlier, it's about thinking for the future and trying to design, if we're going to invest a lot of carbon and a lot of money, we want to make sure that we're actually designing something that has the flexibility to cope with all of the things that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, so the new theatre building that's would use part of the architecture team there is Harold Contracts from the UK, and that all of their buildings use a passive ventilation system. So we for something like that, which would be one-off for Christchurch, we went out and found the best ideas around. And looking long term, it's still going to be useful on this one.
Yeah,
if you think of any questions after, but I wish I would thought of that. We've got the information is there, those contacts are on those forms, are they, Philippa? If there's any further questions.
Well, there is contact on that.
There's a contact on
it.
it, have you say, so if you go there, then it'll get to us anyway. But the really important thing is after this is if you think of things and go, "Look, I wish this really works well at this site, please keep," or hey, if only it had one of these, that would be really good. Or it might be these things don't work. The door's in the wrong place, or it doesn't need moats, or might be better with more community rooms, or less meeting rooms. I don't know. Whatever you think might help the architects when they start putting together ideas for it.
Is it possible to have more than just the slab, but extending it wider than the current slab, or is that one of the?
We would have to look at, it's the consented activity was the yellow line around it, wasn't it? Or not? But I think it included the moat area, which potentially won't go back, so that gives you the opportunity to play around with the size and get rid of the bits of the building that are, this sort of dead space.
I just wondered if it could be considered at this very early design stage that the river was considered a much more important element of the design. Here we are, right beside it.
One of the things about the river, as you say, it's right there, and just across Hunter Terrace, it is the river. We are thinking about a clear connection between the building and the surroundings. But we do have to be cognizant of the rules and the plan, and there are setbacks from the river. So you can't just push close to the river, but that doesn't mean you can't agree with the connection.
Don't turn your back on.
Well, that would have to consider also looking at the problem of the
Put it on your head, you say.
So there's lots of activity around us now, basketball courts, market changes to us. And so we are connecting with all those other elements and bringing things together, because what we don't want to do is miss the opportunity to integrate and have a fantastic solution that works with the wider surrounds.
It's just as important to think about the outside as the inside. Like, don't be bound by thinking about internal space only. And one of the most amazing attributes of this particular community hub is it's one of the few that has that amazing connection or opportunity for connection. So, how can we make the most of it?
When we had the meetings to decide about the design of this building, one of the key factors was the trees must remain.
Yeah, and one got chopped down.
Not the ones at the front, one of the because they're a significant local feature.
Yeah, so the trees on the periphery,
Yes.
for me, they're part of the existing landscape, and it's not our intention to wholesale change the landscape, but when there are changes on the periphery that give us a better connection, that's what we would be looking at. But I don't see taking out the trees as part of that. If anything, maybe there would be some new trees as well as the existing trees. So we're not looking for clearance.
Are these protected trees?
Not technically protected, but they are part of this landscape. So the fact that they're existing and looking at now gives them an element of permanence on the site. You know what I mean by that?
The ironic thing is, so a bit of Hunter Terrace, which is now Esplanade reserve trees, if they're over 6 metres tall, road trees on the road, if they're over 8 metres tall, it's automatically in the district plan. So we have to be careful changing the status of the road, but no intention to do anything with it. You can work around trees.
Trees in here and we'll be ready.
I'm sure one tree was removed after this building.
There used to be 2 big Wallonia trees at the front.
No, I think it was a golden, another. There were 3 of them.
The only
Trawling
tree
that.
that's on the edge of my radar is the one that's close to the corner of the building. So the one very close to the building rather than on the boundary. So we would need to look carefully at what that means with concept and think about that. But what I'm looking at the boundary, so that site to me is.
Don't worry, I've got a parks background and I'm also a project sponsor, so.
I like trees, I'm not a cutter down trees.
This is a side issue. Why are they not protected? I mean, they are significant trees.
Yeah, if they're part of the reserve, like reserve, it's automatic under the district plan. There was a whole lot of changes done with the district plan following the earthquakes. We were even in private property, there was a lot of tree protection that's taken off. So we can have a look and see if they are or not. I just can't remember. Yes.
Just being positive for us.
Carry on with that.
You talked about bridges, but it's actually really good about this, but the acoustics are absolutely well. They're better than any public building I know of in Christchurch. Very definitely. I must have very fond of it. And I can sit with a group there, hear everybody talking. There are kids playing around, and it's fine. And they were kids here, talking, or reading. The acoustics eventually, the last one, I really like to see that museum.
The other thing I was going to mention too is that just to make sure that the local, keeping an eye on the local interests as part of this, the community, there's a member of the community board is going to be part of the project team. So they're always a really good avenue to get, if you lose this phone number, if you get hold of your local community board, they're a really good avenue of getting information. And through the libraries too. They're always good. So.
Can I just tell you the survey? So you're most welcome if you do want to pick up a hard copy today, but just making sure that everyone knows that you don't have to have it in until the 25th of July. So you've got plenty of time to consider. You may have groups that you might want to talk to, you know, in terms of an organisation or a group to give feedback about how you might like to use the building. We do really encourage people to give feedback online if you can, and we've got the links there. But you know, you are most welcome to fill in the hard copy, and you'll be able to bring it back to the library, or else pick one up from the library during that time. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you. But yeah, considered feedback is really important. So that's great. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? And say, if you think of them later, grab the details and flip them through so that we want to catch everything we can. Sure.
I'm Helen Potter, the chair of the local community board. We are as anxious to attain this beloved building as you are. So if you can, there's several of us here, and Councillor Tim Skendrick. Mel was here, but she's just left. She's got a young child. And so we are as anxious to retain the things that you have talked about and have thought about as anybody else. And we very much appreciate this is a much loved building, possibly, as we discussed today, the most loved building in Christchurch. About the trees, we are fanatical about trees. Will be all planted. And so to please just come to any one of the board members. There are several here, and they would very much like to talk to you about it. And we intend to be very active as the building takes place, whichever way it goes.
Thank you. So you have some forms that we don't know about.